What if our relentless drive for human improvement isn't actually a guaranteed path to some glorious future, but maybe it's more like a slippery slope into a kind of monstrous dystopian nightmare?
Yeah.
And what if the very seeds of that nightmare are, already being sown right now in how we understand things like disability or even in how our national politics work?
That's a powerful question to start with.
Well, today we're diving deep into exactly that. We're exploring these really complex, sometimes unsettling intersections of transhumanism, disability studies, and political allegory.
And we're using a surprising lens for it.
Yeah, M. Night Shyamalan's psychological thriller Split. Our deep dive today is called A Dystopian Vision of Transhuman Enhancement, Speciesist and Political Issues Intersecting Trauma and Disability in M. Night Shyamalan's Split.
Right. Our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack a very, very thought-provoking academic paper. It uses Split, as you said, as this focal point to explore how ideas about trauma, disability, and something called speciesism intersect with the whole transhumanist promise itself.
Oh.
And what it reveals, honestly, is a surprisingly dark vision for our collective future. We'll look at how the film functions as a national allegory, even touching on the aftermath of 9/11 and the very nature of democracy.
It's such a fascinating mix, isn't it? Philosophy, film analysis, current events. It genuinely makes you rethink some, fundamental assumptions.
Okay.
Okay, let's dig into this. So let's start with transhumanism itself. That seems like the big idea at the center here. At its core, it's about pushing beyond our current biological limits, right? Enhancing the human species through technology.
Thankfully.
Our source material gives some pretty wild examples, like regenerative medicine, nanotechnology, radical life extension, even mind uploading and cryonics.
Yeah.
It's all about moving humanity forward, isn't it? Or that's the pitch.
That's definitely the pitch. And what's really insightful here is that the paper frames transhumanism as an enlightened anthropocentric agenda.
Anthropocentric,
Yeah.
human-centered.
Human-centered, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's this plan for progress driven by the belief that technological development is inherently good, almost an evolutionary step. It sees tech as the key to helping humans adapt to this increasingly tech-driven world we live in.
Okay.
And, looking back, the paper points out we see this pattern throughout the 20th century. Technology used for, national supremacy, like the eugenics movement, sadly,
Right.
or gaining instrumental advantage in war strategy with early computers, or even for damage control for war victims through prosthetics. So transhumanism kind of continues this historical line, seeing tech as a tool for, perceived advancement.
And when we picture a transhuman being, the image that pops into my head is the cyborg, right?
Yeah.
That blend of biological human and, technological parts. It's such a powerful visual from sci-fi.
It absolutely is a very powerful image. But there's a really crucial nuance the paper highlights. While someone like Donna Haraway, the feminist scholar, famously saw the cyborg as a metaphor for liberation, for self-determination, breaking free from old constraints, maybe transhumanism takes a specific turn. It views technological prosthesis not just as a supplement, something to help a natural body,
Right.
but as an end in itself. It becomes the defining feature, almost unfaithful to its purely natural origins, as the paper puts it. The tech isn't just an add-on, it is the new essence.
Ah, okay. Not just fixing something, but becoming something else entirely.
Precisely. And that distinction really sets the stage for a more critical look at its implications.
Okay, this next part is where the paper's insights get, for me, really thought-provoking. If transhumanism is all about enhancement, how does it end up defining what's normal versus what's disabled? What's the baseline human anymore?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it raises profound issues about the transhumanist ideal itself. The paper argues it projects this extreme, ableist, self-sufficient ideal where, ironically, the merely organic, natural human being is rendered as disabled.
Wow, wait, so we become the disabled ones just by being natural.
That's the argument. Current humanity is effectively seen as an underdeveloped state in human evolution. The paper even makes this striking, maybe a bit provocative comparison.
Yeah.
It says it's similar to how some religious doctrines premise universal sinfulness to then offer salvation. You have to be seen as deficient, to then be perfected or saved by the enhancement. It completely flips the script.
That is unsettling because usually we think of prosthetics as implying a loss or absence, right? Something needing replacement. It sounds a bit like how trauma studies might see disability, something happens to a previously whole person. But you're saying transhumanism views it totally differently.
Yes, and that difference is vital for understanding the paper's critique. Trauma studies typically assume a natural, healthy, whole human being.
Yeah.
Prosthesis is used to restore that wholeness after some kind of loss. But transhumanism, according to this analysis, actually displaces disability towards the natural human. The natural human is now the one seen as traumatized by the loss of their humanist supremacy because they failed to adapt to this new cyborganic norm.
So the trauma isn't the injury, it's not being enhanced.
It's an inversion, yeah. The organic natural body becomes the disabled one, unable to keep up.
Okay, so this brings in what the paper calls a speciesist angle.
Yeah.
Just to clarify for everyone listening, speciesism is like racism or sexism, but discrimination based on species or perceived group superiority. It sounds like both mainstream views on disability and transhumanism can fall into this trap just from opposite ends.
Exactly. Mainstream ableism, the paper argues, often views impairment as a traumatic loss and can perceive disabled people as somehow infrahuman, less than fully human. Prosthesis then signals this perceived natural infrahumanity. The body itself is seen as deficient. Transhumanism, on the other hand, celebrates technological prosthesis as a sign of evolutionary supremacy. But it signals a different kind of loss, the loss experienced by the now inferior natural human.
So either way, someone's being deemed inferior.
In both cases, yes, there's an assertion of supremacy based on a perceived lack. But what constitutes that lack and what makes something superior are fundamentally different, even opposing.
It's interesting, though. The paper notes both approaches, transhumanism and disability studies, actually align with something called the constructivist paradigm. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. The constructivist paradigm is basically the idea that many of our realities, like what we consider normal or disabled, aren't fixed natural truths. They're shaped by our society, our culture, power structures. They're constructed.
Okay.
So disability studies uses this idea to challenge the ableist norm as culture-bound oppression. It argues disability is often a socially generated system of discrimination, not just a physical limitation. It wants to deconstruct the idea of a normal body. Transhumanism also embraces constructivism, but differently. It celebrates the freedom that discursive technologies provide in the self-determining construction of the self. Basically, technology lets us build our own identity, even our own bodies, and it sees the old naturalized humanist paradigm as restrictive, something to break free from.
Two very different uses of the same core idea.
Very different goals, yeah.
And what's really insightful from our source here is that the core demand from disability studies isn't about setting up a new hierarchy. It's about demanding a change in the configuration of the human paradigm that acknowledges equal status to the different embodiments of natural human experience.
Exactly. It's pushing for genuine inclusion and recognition of diversity, not just swapping one form of exclusion for another.
So, okay, if these are the complex theories we're dealing with, how do they actually play out in a story? This is where M. Night Shyamalan's Split comes in as this fascinating, pretty chilling lens. The source argues it's not just a thriller, it's a profound political allegory.
It's really striking how the film introduces Kevin Wendell Crumb. He's a character with dissociative identity disorder, or DID, profoundly shaped by severe child abuse. And the paper argues that Split essentially renders a dystopian vision of transhumanity, precisely because it starts by pathologizing this fragmentary and dysfunctional or maybe just different human identity.
Right. It's like the story explores what happens when difference itself gets labeled a deficit and then, well, suppressed or controlled. And the film highlights this by contrasting that traditional ideal Vitruvian model, Da Vinci's perfect man, one body, one mind, with Dr. Karen Fletcher's perspective. The APA, the source notes, assumes a single body must correspond to a single, unified, coherent, and cohesive mind, like that Vitruvian ideal.
Yeah, the standard model.
But Kevin's psychiatrist, Dr. Fletcher, she sees each of his 23 personalities not as just fragments, but as different persons almost. They have distinct bodies, genders, interests in his mind. She really challenges that unified ideal.
She does. And her perspective effectively describes Kevin's mind as a kind of democratic community. The film even visualizes this. Remember the circle of chairs in his mind, where the personalities sort of democratically decide who is to be physically embodied, who gets to be in the light, as they call it, which immediately brings up real-world issues, right? Majority rule, oppressed minorities, but all happening within one person, fighting for control and expression.
That internal struggle and the trauma inflicted on some of Kevin's personalities eventually leads to the terrifying creation of the beast, right? The 24th personality, the one with superhuman qualities.
Exactly. And our source explains the beast's existence as being born directly from individually and institutionally inflicted traumas. It's framed as a kind of redemptive myth created by some personalities to resist what they feel is their institutional infliction of disability. You know, the diagnosis, the treatment being seen as broken.
So the beast is like a reaction to being pathologized.
In a way, yes. A radical, violent reaction. And its moral logic is really chilling, but also profound. It rejoices in suffering, believing it purges people, makes them superior to normal or untouched folks.
Which explains why it kidnaps the untouched girls.
Right. But then, crucially, it spares Casey. Because she has visible scars from her own history of abuse, it spares her because she has suffered.
Wow.
Which raises this disturbing question. What does it mean when a supposedly superior being defines itself by trauma and validates suffering as the only path to purity? The dark implication, the paper suggests, is that the transhuman pure already exists as a different species, integrated by all those who have evolved as a result of their suffering.
And that final scene at the zoo, that powerful zoo analogy, Casey the survivor seeing the captive animals and them seeing her, our source connects that directly to the ableist and human supremacist discourses we talked about.
It draws a line, between those discourses and the static oppression of anyone deemed inferior, whether on a speciesist basis like the animals or an ableist one.
So the beast's vision for the pure, the ones who've suffered, it actually ends up perpetuating the same kind of ableist and speciesist paradigms it claims to be fighting against.
Precisely. It reveals this deep dystopia hiding under the surface of what looks like evolution or transcendence.
Okay, so stepping back from the film itself, what does this all mean? The source material argues Split works as this powerful national allegory. It connects Kevin's very personal trauma and how he's treated institutionally to the political causes and consequences of structural traumas inflicted on the population in America. Particularly, it mentions the context of 9/11.
Yeah, this is where the paper draws some really provocative historical and political parallels. It talks about the old idea of the many-headed monster in politics.
Oh, the what now?
The many-headed monster. You can trace it back to thinkers like Hobbes and his Leviathan. That idea of a unified singular state, or Edmund Burke describing a mob that way. Basically, any deviation from a kind of eugenic model of uniformity is seen as abnormal or diseased.
Ah, okay, fear of difference.
Exactly. And the source connects this fear to things like early 20th century U.S. immigration policies, which often used bodily traits, supposedly signaling mental and physical impairments. And this included racial, ethnic, and gender difference as forms of impairment as a basis for excluding people. It's about this deep fear of difference threatening a single ideal body politic.
And then there's this really striking analysis. The source brings in Osama bin Laden's letter to America. Now, we need to be absolutely clear here. We are just reporting on the academic paper's analysis of this letter. We are not endorsing any viewpoints in it whatsoever.
Absolutely. Clarity on that is crucial. The paper uses bin Laden's justification for 9/11, where he accused American citizens of collectively choosing and affirming government policies, to ironically highlight how the assumption of a homogeneous, coherent, and cohesive American body politic is itself fundamentally flawed.
So the critique is aimed at the assumption of unity.
Yes. The paper argues that both bin Laden's justification and certain U.S. policies make a similar critical error. They disregard the internal differences between the diverse embodiments of complex political bodies. And this disregard for internal complexity, the paper contends, leads directly to structural oppression. It cites the Patriot Act after 9/11 as an example of a measure that, quote, suppressed individual liberties in order to restore its Leviathan federal health. Again, assuming a single body needed curing through uniformity. And just to reiterate, we are presenting the paper's analysis here for your consideration, not our own political take.
Understood. Just laying out the source's argument. So bringing this back to Split and the Beast isn't just some monster then. It's seen as an instrument of divine retributive justice.
That's the interpretation, reflecting the superhuman split or composite nature of its many-headed embodiment. It becomes a model for other complex, multifaceted entities. The paper mentions things like the International Terrorist Cell, the U.S. Body Politics, or the International Corporation. All entities that have this kind of many-headed power and act with their own internal, sometimes brutal logic.
Wow.
And then there's the concept of the normates. That's the term used for those who haven't suffered injustice. In the beast's logic, they are deemed either guilty of supporting institutional oppression just by existing untouched, or simply morally inferior.
That is bleak.
It paints this picture of a traumatic dystopia, where the supposed utopian transhumanist promise for the pure few is built entirely on the enforced treatment and the pathologizing of others, those deemed merely normal or untouched. It's a chilling reversal of who gets considered whole or worthy.
This all seems to lead towards what the paper calls critical posthumanism, which, as I understand it, questions that traditional idea of a fixed ideal human and looks at how technology and power actually reshape us. It seems to align with needing to really consider the causes of disabling trauma, not just the symptoms.
Precisely. Critical posthumanism pushes us to ask, does transhumanism's promise to dissolve old humanist ideals actually end up perpetuating, if not intensifying, such exclusions, just with new tools?
Instead of moving beyond them.
Yeah. It's a powerful call to really examine the foundations of what we call progress.
Yeah.
Are we actually progressing or just finding new ways to exclude?
Wow. We have covered some incredibly dense, really thought-provoking territory today, from the philosophical ideas behind transhumanism to the allegorical depths of a horror film like Split, and even into the complex socio-political fallout of a national tragedy.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but I think the core unsettling insight, for me, is this idea that our very drive for enhancement could ironically twist around and redefine natural humanity itself as a kind of disability. Or that these powerful narratives of suffering could be used to justify completely new forms of speciesist exclusion. Split, viewed through this lens, really forces us to confront how our understanding of wholeness, of normalcy, is never neutral. It's always politically charged, always tangled up in power dynamics.
This deep dive really lays bare how notions of trauma, disability, identity, they aren't just personal individual experiences, are they? They're deeply woven into broader societal structures, political power. It really makes you wonder who actually gets to define what evolution truly means, and crucially, at what cost to whom.
And that leaves us with, I think, a really provocative final thought to chew on. If this utopian promise of transcending our human limitations is actually built on pathologizing what it means to be merely human, are we truly evolving, or are we just maybe replicating old patterns of oppression but with shinier, newer technologies? What does it genuinely mean to be pure or whole in this increasingly complex, technologically saturated world we're moving into?
A lot to think about there. We definitely encourage you to perhaps revisit Split with some of these ideas floating in your mind, or maybe explore the fascinating fields of transhumanism and disability studies further. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.